Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Tumitadi, and today I just want to give you just a little bit of a taste of what I'm capable of when I say I can teach, I can mentor, I can tutor anyone who wants to learn programming or development. Do you understand? So today we're going to talk about a favorite subject of mine, which is a database. How do you now build a database and have your web application communicate to a database, have your software application communicate to a database, have your mobile application communicating to a database? So let me create a brand new project and I want you to pay attention. I'm gonna go and choose web and console, right? And then we're gonna choose the MVC one. Now I want you to pay attention to something, right? And when I hit continue, I'm using .NET 7, right? And then I'm gonna say authentication. It's gonna be individual authentication in app. This is very, very important. I'm gonna configure HTTP and then do not use the top level statements for a reason. Now, this is where I want you to, let's say, data access layer, right? So I wanna show you how license tips has, extracted the knowledge of how to build the data access layer. So how do you end up having the project called data access layer, whereas I've created a web application? It's fine. Let me show you something. I'm not going to run it. When you go to data, that's the first thing I want you to pay attention to. Data folder by default has migration. We'll talk about migration in a second, but this is the most important class I want to talk about, this guy. So here it is. So this class, it's application DB context. You can name this to be anything. Maybe you are building an app for books. You can say books DB context. This is very important that you should leave it DB context anywhere in your class name. It's fine. I like to keep it as application DB context. So it's going to inherit it from identity DB context. So there's a base class for entity framework database context used for identity, and we'll talk about the entity framework. There's a video I'm gonna make where I show you what entity framework is all about, right? And then obviously it has a constructor what that pass in the DB context option, right? Or that expects a DB context option, right? And then also it implements the base that comes from identity DB context. Okay, we got that part. So let's go to program class. I want you to focus on this line. So we have a builder.services. If you don't know what program class is all about, I've made videos on web for web API and MVC where I talk about the program class. I also spoke about this class on Mari. There it's called Mari program class, right? So I'm not going to go through this, but this is the most important one I want you to be aware of. Builder.services, right? What is a service? A service is a collection of services for the application to compose. This is useful for adding user provided or framework provided services. So we're gonna say add DB context that makes use of that application DB context, and we're gonna say this is gonna be the options for it. Options gonna use by default SQLite, and we'll talk about this. I don't like using SQLite. I like using SQL Server, right? And you pass in the connection string. When you get the connection string, there you go. There you go and get your connection string, right? It's fine. So that's something I want you to be aware of. Another class I want you to pay attention to is gonna be identity user. Identity user is a default implementation of identity user, right? Which uses a string as a primary key. Now, this is everything, right? But how do you now abstract all of this and make data access layer as independent project? I'm glad that you asked that. Then let me show you with licensing tips. I'm glad I don't have anything I've been working on because I pushed the recent update to Google Play Store and Apple Store, and I'm waiting for their review feedback. All right, so the project I want to focus on is under library apps solution folder. This is the project. So the same thing I showed you with that data access layer dummy project is that I removed that data folder that you saw that site. And also if you look at program class, I removed all of that services, I only have one line because I have abstracted everything to, let's go to now installers. We'll talk about this in a second, but let's go back to data access layer project. So database, and then what I did, I created a folder called identity. In there I have this application DB context, right? Now this is what I said, it's what makes up a database. So now this one, it also inherits from identity DB context, but we are also passing in application user. So where does this application user come from? In a case of license any tips, this is the class. Now this is a class that I want to inherit from identity user. So identity user has all kinds of stuff, you know. Let me see if I can. Okay, they don't want me to get the references or definition. Okay, yeah, definitions. Okay, I also want to get the definition. There we go. So here you get stuff like a ID, which is the primary key, the username, normalized username, you get the email, normalized email, you get email confirmed, password hash, security stamp, phone number confirmed, two-factor enabled, you understand? So all of this I get by default. So what I'm doing is I'm creating my own class and I'm gonna inherit from that. This is where all the users are gonna go for LHT, license any tips. Whether you are the admin or just any other user, this is where everything's gonna go, right? Now, while I'm here, I want to talk about these are the properties, meaning that this property is gonna be turned into a column in a table. So the table name, we'll talk about what the table name is, but this is gonna be a column in this table, right? All of these. If you now say this is going to have an attribute, we call this attribute in C# or .NET. Attribute is going to have a required attribute. What this means, it will specify that a data field value is required, meaning that you need to pass in a value for LHT if you're going to now initialize this application user class. But note here, I don't make use of that, right? I don't make use of that. Okay. So we have this, so you can have stuff like is user deleted, is user suspended, when was the user created, right? Cool. Now let's go back to application DB context, right? So here, there's a lot to talk about. Okay, this is going to be part 1 officially. I'm going to do part 2 because this is going to be a long video. I'll talk about this at a later stage. But what I'm going to talk about is that constructor, right? The default constructor. But this is what I want to focus on, and I'll talk about part 2 in a second. I'll make a video for part 2. So me overwriting on model creating. This method configures the schema needed for identity framework. What it does is that I am overwriting this class. Instead of it creating whatever name to be their table name, I want this to be LHT_users. This will be the actual table name. And this, instead of this, it will be LHT_user rows. This is where my user rows are gonna go, and we'll talk about this. But these are the actual rows. Let's say I have a row for customers, and I have a rows for clients, I have a rows for stakeholders. They're all gonna go in there. But the user that's gonna be a stakeholder, let's say John is a stakeholder, it's gonna go in there. But for us to say John is a stakeholder, we're gonna send the data in here. So like I said, I can teach you all this, right? So this is me overwriting the default table names in entity, using entity framework, right? Schema, and also using .NET. So, but like I said, I'll talk about this. I'll make another video and talk about my additional tables, what happens here, and we'll talk about this folder. I'll talk about this folder. Listen, I can teach you all this for a full hour if you schedule a session for 25 Rand. I'm available on weekdays from Monday to Friday from 8 p.m. until 9 p.m. 25 Rand per session. We're gonna do this on Microsoft Teams, and then you can ask as many questions as you want, and I can show you all of this. Sounds good? I'll leave my numbers.